So let's recap where we are so far. We have hopefully installed our PyCharms so that we can run our first Hello World programs, and hopefully you've also learned a little bit about variables and very brief introduction into print. So let's dive deeper into how Python works in terms of input and output. So we should have already looked at variables and mathematical expressions, and today we're going to focus on input and output functions. And just as a review, there are two types of values in computer programs, variables and literals. Variables are names that include identifiers that point to values in memory, whereas literals are literal values that you can see in the program itself, such as 4.567, the string hello John, or the integer -2345. Let's take a look at a slightly more complicated Python program than we've seen before. And when we look at a new Python program, we want to try and make a hypothesis about what we think that program is going to output. This serves two purposes. One, it helps us hone our abilities to recognize and understand code we've never seen before, making us a better programmer. And two, it helps us be very efficient in our learning. So wherever your intuition doesn't match up with what happens when the program is run, that's where you need to delve deeper, and it gives you a learning opportunity. So this is how we can make our time very efficient in terms of learning. So let's look at how this, so here's an example program. Let's take a look at how it runs. So I'm going to run the program on the command line. You could also run the program in PyCharm. So what's my favorite color? Let's say blue. Ooh, cool. It outputs my favorite color is light blue. And on a scale of 1 to 10, how much do I like Urban Fire? I'm going to say 8. Ooh, I like it 14.4. So now let's take a look back and see if we can use this to understand what the code is doing. So here we've got the input and eval functions. These are two new functions. We've seen print before, but not eval and input. Input is going to take the user input for us, and then we're storing that result in a variable that we're then printing out on the next line, line 6. The next step, we're getting input, and we're storing it in the variable rating, except we've got this eval here first. Eval is going to help us convert a string type data into a numeric type, such as integer or float. And that's why we're allowed to multiply the variable rating by 1.8. If we didn't have eval, and in fact I encourage you to experiment with this code and try and remove that. If we didn't have eval in the code, then we would get an error because we can't multiply a string by 1.8. We can multiply a string by integers, but we can't multiply a string by floats. Now, one more point of reference. This code isn't very intelligent. For example, let's see what happens if instead of entering a color, I enter hamburger. So I'm saying my favorite color is hamburger. How much do I like Urban Fire? What happens if I enter a string instead of a number? So things don't work quite the way we have planned or we anticipated when we don't give the desired input. Okay, now in the code above, we want to identify comments, variables, function calls, expressions, assignments, and literals. So the comments in the code are in the top. They're these gray italic strings, and they're preceded by the hashtag. This is how we indicate comments in code. And comments are just for the programmer. The Python interpreter ignores them. In terms of variables, we have color, Q2, and rating. Those are the 3 variables, and I identify them by looking for variable names to the left of equal signs. Next, we have function calls. Input, print, eval, input, and print are all function calls. We also have some expressions. Expressions are mathematical expressions such as rating times 1.8. We also have 3 assignments here: color equals, Q2 equals, rating equals. And we have quite a few literals. We have string literals: what is your favorite color? Cool, my favorite color, exclamation point, on a scale of 1 to 10, cool, I like it, exclamation point. Those are all string literals, and you can tell that they're string literals because they're surrounded by double quotes or single quotes. We also have a numeric literal here, 1.8. 1.8 is a float literal. Okay. So we already looked at how we can interact with the Input Demo program. I highly encourage you, all of the code is available on Google Drive. I highly encourage you to play with this example. You could also practice your Python syntax by typing it in yourself and play with it. Try and mess with it. See what happens. So computer science is all about making hypotheses and playing, trying to experiment. So when we get input from the user, we use input and eval. Input is a function that reads in strings or text, and eval converts the strings and text into numbers. The syntax of these functions are input, and inside the parentheses is a string prompt. And if we're getting a number, we would put eval around it. Here's some example assignments. For example, we would say width equals eval input, enter the width. That's when we're trying to get a number. And then if we want to just get a string, like a name, we would say name equals input, what is your name? And so the part in the double quotes is the prompt. Width is assigned the number that the user enters, and then we use eval and input together to get a number from a user. In the second example, name is assigned the string the user enters, and we only use input because we want a string, so we don't use eval. Here's another example. Color equals input, what is your favorite color? The semantics of this statement is to assign the variable color the user's input. And so for example, as we saw in our demo, if we enter in blue, the program responds, cool, my favorite color is light blue. Keep in mind that when we use the input function, it's going to grab every character that we enter up until the user hits the enter key or the new line.